Hello and welcome to Plus Sports on Plus TV Africa. I'm your host, Mikhail Tinubu. It's been a busy day in the world of transfer dealings as the transfer market has just seen a tug of war between Chelsea and Liverpool, which isn't quite yet over. As at the beginning of the day, it seemed Moises Caicedo was set to sign for Liverpool after the Merseyside club made a bid of £110 million overnight. There had been an auction held by Brighton to sell Moises Caicedo. And Chelsea had made a bid of £100 million, finally coming to the exact number of valuation that Brighton had been holding out for throughout the summer window. But Liverpool stepped in and made a £110 million bid, and Brighton have accepted that bid over the Chelsea bid, meaning Brighton expects Moises Caicedo to go to Liverpool. And it all seemed like that would be that. Personal terms were all that were needed to be agreed, as Moises Caicedo was expected to go through the medical that was booked today at Liverpool. However, Moises Caicedo has apparently said to Liverpool and to Jurgen Klopp that he prefers to go to Chelsea. After all, Chelsea have been pursuing the deal since the end of May, and personal terms had been agreed since then. And Moises Caicedo seems to want to be a man of his word, which is not typical of players these days when they start out wanting to go to one club and then another club steps in to swoop and hijack the deal, and maybe the deal is better for them and they choose that second club. But Moises Caicedo still wants to go to Chelsea. Brighton have held out for their price, and it seems they might very well get even more than they were hoping for. And there's now a report that Chelsea are preparing to come back with another bid, which could mean that this particular saga goes on for another couple of days. There's a possibility Chelsea could offer as much as £120 million. And if Liverpool are serious, they might come back with another offer higher than that Chelsea bid. For now, the only bid that has been accepted is the Liverpool one, while Moises Caicedo waits to decide where he will end up. Chelsea are in the wings, and now a report has actually come out that Chelsea have pulled out of the Tyler Adams deal, which was set to go through after Chelsea activated his £20 million release clause from Leeds United. Chelsea want to concentrate all of their efforts into the Moises Caicedo deal, which probably means they want to put all of the money that they would have spent on the Tyler Adams deal on Moises Caicedo. Now, that doesn't mean they can't or won't return to the deal, but for now, Moises Caicedo is the only deal they want to make, and maybe they will get their man, maybe they won't. It's yet to be decided. But this brings to mind a topic of discussion. Where is the transfer market heading? For years, we've talked about the exaggerated price tags being placed on players. And now the Saudi Pro League has entered the chat room. And it seems they are ready to pay, most clubs in the league are ready to pay more than even the asking price. In a few years, Saudi Arabia could show up with a check of 150, 170, maybe even £200 million to try to steal Moises Caicedo from Chelsea or Liverpool, depending on who ends up buying him come the end of this window. And Harry Kane is about to complete his deal to Bayern Munich, which would be a club record deal. In fact, Bayern Munich have only spent above £40 million on about maybe 7 players in the last 10 years. Most of them have been defenders. Recently, it was Upamecano that was bought. Pavard was bought, and it seems now Bayern Munich, without the position of director of football being filled, with the position currently empty, Thomas Tuchel has the most power in deciding what players come in, and he is adamant that he wants Harry Kane. Bayern Munich have been on the trail of Harry Kane for the last couple of years, and they feel he would suit the team's way of playing. The prestige of getting the England team's captain to come to Germany to spearhead their attack is also a move too enticing for the Bundesliga Bavarian club to ignore. And for that reason, they are absolutely adamant that Harry Kane must come. And with numbers between 100 million euros and 100 million pounds being thrown around, who knows? The deal, depending on the final outcome of the report that will eventually come out on exact figures that have been agreed on this deal, we might find out that there are add-ons that would take the deal as high as 120 million pounds. But it says a lot when a team, a club like Bayern Munich, who have prided themselves on not making exorbitant purchases, go all out to buy a player like Harry Kane, who is, or in a few hours, maybe a day or two, was in the last year of his Tottenham Hotspur contract. What does it say about the nature of the transfer market right now, that even players who are in the final years of their contract, players like Declan Rice, who was in his final year at West Ham United, still got sold for £105 million to Arsenal. Last season, the conversation was around a valuation of £70 million. Come the summer window, West Ham suddenly decides £100 million is what they will go for. And in order to prevent Man City from getting a march on the player, Arsenal went above the £100 million pound mark and bid 105. And it just seems like we're going around in circles. In a few years, a deal like Harry Kane's might be £150 million with a player in his final year. No matter how valuable a player is any player worth that amount? Kylian Mbappe famously joined PSG for about £150 million. The ever-present Neymar in PSG's side joined the squad for £200 million. It seems the window has just gone crazy, and some blame it on the price tag placed on Neymar and paid by PSG for being the reason why the market has become so overbloated. And every year, a club makes a deal that the vast majority of pundits agree isn't quite right for the market. And now, this summer window, we're about to have multiple deals. Famously, in January, Chelsea went ahead and paid £106 million for Enzo Fernandez. There was all kinds of talk about it not being worth it. The player shouldn't have been worth that amount. My argument at the time was that this player was just coming back from the World Cup, just won the World Cup, and only about 4 to 6 months prior had just joined Benfica. So, of course, the price tag would be at its peak because he had years still to go on his contract. But now we're having players leave clubs for 100 and more million pounds, even though they're in their final year. What does that say for the kinds of players that Chelsea have bought and signed up for 6, 7, 8 year contracts? What happens in the next 1 or 2 seasons if Madrid decides they want to pick up a Modric from Chelsea? Surely Chelsea would be well within their rights to ask for more than £120 million, given that he would still have about 5 years left on his contract minimum. But I do have a guest with me, Gboyega, and we're going to dissect some of this. I'm going to get his opinion, and I think Gbenga is on the line. Gbenga, good evening.
Yes, I am. Good evening. Nice to be here.
This whole saga regarding Moises Caicedo seems to be set to go on for another couple of days, perhaps. It's unfortunate that this is where it has come to. But it brings to mind the Mohamed Kudus deal that is currently being held up by the player. Brighton have made an offer. Ajax have accepted the bid. Negotiations over personal terms have been concluded, but the player isn't quite yet ready to join Brighton because reports are saying he wants to wait and see if Arsenal will come back for him, if Chelsea will come back for him. Those are the two clubs that have been linked to him. And we all know that Manchester City are also in the market for a right winger after Riyad Mahrez left the club. So he might also come out to be on the City shopping list, a potential option for City. And the reports also state that Kudus wants a release clause if he is to sign for Brighton, because he doesn't want to be priced out of a potential move to a dream club in the future. Famously, if you remember, 2 seasons ago, or 2 summers ago, Harry Kane wanted to join Man City. He even went on a strike for about a week or so. But Daniel Levy refused to allow the deal to go through. He was asking for about £150 million. Now, of course, the player came back, acted the professional that he is, and carried on with business as usual. But he was denied the opportunity to join City. And right now, he could be not just a Premier League champion, but also a Champions League winner. But that story never happened. Maybe in another universe, in another galaxy far, far away, that might have happened, but it didn't happen in this one. Will players soon start insisting on release clauses when they join clubs like Brighton? Brighton are considered a stepping stone club, and once upon a time, the likes of Porto, Benfica used to be clubs that buy cheap and sell big. Now, the prices that they are asking for are so exorbitant, so outrageous, that clubs may decide to pull out of such deals, look for alternatives, and then that player misses such a move for another season or another 2 seasons. In fact, a move like that may never come around again. Will players be asking for release clauses even in England in the next year or 2?
Well, the question should be, why shouldn't they? If there are different clauses that already exist in the player contract, and most, if not all of those clauses, are not to the advantage of the player. They are determined or leveraged by either the player agent or the club. You talk about buyback clause, the club that has it. You talk about release clause that currently exists. You have to pay it to the club. When you talk about transfer fees, the agent have their cut. Most of the clauses that currently exist do not have the players at the center of it. So if the players begin to demand to leave even within their contract, especially if those clauses exist when they sign, why not? I mean, it just makes the field a level playing field, and it makes the club know that they can't take the decisions solely on their own. Big players at the moment, like Kylian Mbappe, are beginning to redefine how players can influence their contract, because trust me, most of the will I say wordings in the contract of Mbappe, they were not solely from PSG. Some of them were influenced by Mbappe, because most part of that contract were just like giving him the keys to the city. So we are getting to that point in football where players are beginning to wield soft power. And
well, in
it's not a bad.
Spain, in La Liga, every contract is mandated to have a release clause. Now, sometimes those release clauses, especially in the cases of clubs like Madrid, Barcelona, they are the pinnacle clubs in the league. So sometimes they will put a £200 million release clause. In some instances, they have put as much as £1 billion pounds release
Exactly.
clause. But for clubs like Rio Vallecano, Real Valladolid, Real Sociedad, the Valencias, the rest of them, typically they respect the players' wishes, they respect their position within the league, they respect that they cannot hold the players at their disposal in contracts that would prevent them from ever moving to a Barcelona or Real Madrid or maybe a Bayern Munich, Chelsea, Manchester City. In the coming years now, would the Premier League ever consider such a thing, or will players be the ones who drive release clauses to become a staple in the league, in the Premier League?
Like we've already established in this discussion, the release clause that currently exists has no benefit to the players whatsoever. It either benefits the agents who want bigger prices for their players while they have like 2 or 3 more years on their contract, or is benefiting the club who also have some cuts from the transfer fee. If the players are going to have any form of power over their contract in a way that it benefits them individually, I don't think it will be based on release clauses. It could just be based on probably your, how would I put it now, your price per game. So if you promise them you're going to give them like 50 games in the season, yeah, you're going to have physical fitness. Because I've seen people like Griezmann be giving a particular amount based on 30 minutes to play. I mean, they time you and your contract is based on how much game time you have. So players can wield power from game time, because I've seen a lot of players that have fitness season in, season out. So basically, I feel release clause is not the way to benefit players. It has always benefited clubs and agents. Players have to look for something else.
However, some players do use the release clause agreements to get to stabilize the pricing of the valuation of the player themselves. Because in the case of Lucas Paqueta, for example, that is currently being pursued by Manchester City, there is a release clause that is set to come into effect next summer, which goes for £85 million. That is what the reports are saying. But because this season, this summer, that release clause hasn't been activated, West Ham can ask for much more than the £85 million. So wouldn't it be better for a player if he goes into a contract knowing that in the next couple of years he expects to place a certain amount of games, win certain trophies for the club, and therefore would become more attractive and more visible to teams at the upper echelons of the leagues, the teams that would be vying for league titles? Wouldn't it be more prudent for such players to go into contract negotiations knowing that they will be moving on in 2 or 3 seasons, and therefore they want a release clause? If the players are driving it, surely that can benefit them.
For a player to drive it, you have to know how many years contract they are on. Because a player of 4 years contract or 3 years contract, how are you going to determine if he will come into the fore in 1 season or in 2 seasons? He has little time to prove himself. Unlike the Chelsea routine, where you have players on 8 years contract, 10 years contract, you definitely know, or you could definitely project that in 2-3 years they begin to come into their own, because they've been used to the system over time. I mean, the entire reason why Reece James is currently the captain of Chelsea is because not just that he's young, he has been through the system since the age of 6, and he understands from the age grade up to the senior level. So he has built that fitness, albeit in recent times he's been experiencing injuries, but hopefully he corrects that. But over time, what he can bring to the fore in terms of quality, in terms of service, and also previously in terms of fitness is what will determine his market value tomorrow. So it only works for players who have long-term deals or who are going to be in the club for a long time. So someone like Harry Kane now, of course, those kind of clauses would favor him. He spent over a decade in the club. But players like Thiago Silva or other players who have just 2-3 years in their contract, they can't really have that to benefit them, because the question is, when will they come into the top of the club? Is it one season time or 2 seasons time? It's too small.
I've always found it strange that players put so much trust in the ownership of clubs, because with release clauses not being a staple in the English game, in English contracts, typically when a player says, I want to leave, they might say, stay, we'll sell you next season. They'll give them their word. Now, the English are known for being gentlemen, and so men of their words. But these days, it doesn't seem like their word means much, because in January, the very end of January, reports came out that Caicedo wanted to leave to join Arsenal, and Arsenal had made an £80 million bid to get him. And at that time, the reports state that the club made a promise to Caicedo that they would sell him if anyone came in with a deal as high as £80 million. Now, that's fixed his valuation, and for the rest of the season, pundits talked about how he would be moving on and his valuation would be £80 million and so on and so forth. Come summer window, Brighton decide a £20 million increase on his valuation, subsequent to seeing how much Rice went for in his sale to Arsenal. So now, £20 million, if Liverpool hadn't come into this current discussion, this current deal, trying to hijack the deal under the noses of Chelsea, we might still be seeing that this deal would get completed for about maybe £90 million, a midway point between the £80 million that was initially reported and the £100 million that suddenly became the new valuation. But if players can't trust owners anymore, is there any point in the future for players to say, okay, a club has said they will sell me next season? If players can't trust that the clubs will sell them next season for the prices that they've agreed on, are we not going to see more instances of players rebelling, packing up their lockers, going on strikes, insisting they be sold that very window?
So basically, I feel like we overrate trust in football. First of all, can clubs trust their players? We saw recently where it came out that as at the 10th of June, just 2 days after, no, 12th of June, that's 2 days after the UEFA Champions League final, Lukaku and his agent had a discussion with Juventus on a possible deal to move 2 days after the Champions League final. It didn't come out at the time. And this is an Inter Milan side who were about to let go of Dzeko. Probably Lautaro Martinez might stay or leave. So Lukaku was basically the next in line. He's professed his love for the club over the years. He literally betrayed Chelsea fans to go back to Inter. Why did he do that 2 days after the campaign was over for Inter Milan? So can clubs trust players? Look at the case between PSG and Kylian Mbappe. Probably PSG had that gentleman's agreement that Mbappe was going to extend his contract at the end of next summer so that his valuation will increase for Real Madrid to come, not knowing that Mbappe already had in mind not to do that and go on a free next summer. Can clubs trust players? Okay,
in the Mbappe story, reports have said, or should I say, pundits have postulated that the initial deal that kept him at PSG gave him a lot of conditions that PSG agreed to, that certain players, certain ambitious moves would be made in the transfer market. But those moves were never followed through on. Bernardo Silva was famously supposed to join the club at that time. They never went for him. Now, instead, top strikers were ignored. Instead, they tried to buy Skamaka, a player that ended up in West Ham. And if a player like that ended up at West Ham when PSG wanted him, it probably tells you that PSG weren't all that serious about getting him, even though he was the only player, the only striker that they actually made serious moves for. So perhaps Mbappe's decision wasn't pre-decided long ago. Perhaps it happened by in the due course of realizing that none of the promises that have been made to him, that had been made to him, were being followed through on. But I want to ask this question: If players do decide, you know what, I'm going to go on a strike, I'm going to pack my locker up, I'm going to make this club sell me now. If players suddenly decide to be more petulant than they've ever been, and follow in the same manner that famously Carlos Tevez did years ago at Manchester City, when he left the club, went to Argentina, was playing rounds of golf pretty much every day, was ignoring Man City calls, even though Man City were fining him for every single day, every single week he was in Argentina. He didn't care, he didn't much mind. Can clubs do anything to hold on to their players when they decide to pull such moves? Hello?
Contract and negotiation. See, can you hear me?
Yes, please
Hello?
go on.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. So contract and negotiation, right? I mean, there can be politics played, there can be diplomacy, we can try to play around the bush, but contract and negotiations remain the core. So regardless of how a player wants to leave, if the contract is still down, then it's down to negotiations of the clubs that want to buy him and the agent. If they can supersede the contract, if there's a release clause, they can trigger it. I mean, nobody does things haphazardly. No matter how Kane wanted to leave, how much Kane wanted to leave at the time, contract and the negotiations with Man City did see one another, right? All of a sudden, Cristiano Ronaldo was in the mix to go to Man City, and from nowhere, Manchester United came in and took Cristiano Ronaldo. None of those things happened outside the papers. None of those things happened outside contract. Cristiano Ronaldo was already leaving Italy, probably on a free. His contract had ended. So it was easy for any club to come to him. It wasn't as if he had a pre-contract agreement with Man City. So at the end of the day, no matter how diplomatic a player wants to be or a club wants to be, when they finish running around, they'll have to report back to the contract and the negotiations to understand the power they have. Look at Kylian Mbappe, for example. With all the power play he has, he cannot just wake up and leave PSG. He's still in contract with them till next summer. So, bad as he bad, like they say in local parlance, PSG can make him sit on the bench, even if he wants to exercise his right. But he will sit on the bench because he's under contract. If he was a free agent, he could walk away, the power of contract. Right? So, at the end of the day, I feel contracts and negotiations remain the core. No matter how free a player wants to be, no matter how wise a club wants to be, they will still have to report to the contract. Which is why when a player is signing a contract, that is where they make or mar their career.
Do you think there are clubs that insist on prices that could prevent players to leave to join bigger clubs when they are being pursued? Do you think such clubs will get bad reputations going forward, and therefore players will think twice about joining them?
So release clauses come in two different ways, right? Remember the record fee that was paid for Neymar? It was also a release clause, 222, if I could remember, million. It was triggered by PSG because they had the money, but it was a release clause, and that release clause had a tenure. Look at Erling Haaland, for example. Erling Haaland also has a release clause, but Man City were able to play around the contract and negotiations to get him for 60 million. Look at Gavi and Pedri at Barcelona. They have release clauses of 1 billion, but that 1 billion has a tenure. So another club can come and say, probably get the player's agreement beforehand, and when it gets to the point where the tenure elapses, the player can come out and say, okay, I have this personal agreement with this club. It's left for the club and club to come to their own agreement. So the club is wise enough to hold down the player so that when it is probably 1 year to go, 6 months to go, he doesn't look for other clubs because this club was already there. It's the same thing that happened with Slonina for Chelsea. They already got him way back last season. So whatever happens with his club in the MLS, he knows his heart is at Chelsea. It is the same thing happening with Caicedo. They already agreed with Caicedo on the 29th of May, which is why Liverpool thought they were hijacking the deal. The contract and negotiations came to play in favor of Chelsea.
Now, have the Kane and Rice deals ended the era of players getting cheaper as their contracts run down? I speak, of course, that about the fact that clubs used to be able to buy a player for considerably cheaper when that player is in his final year. However, with the Harry Kane and Rice deal, it's proven that just because a player is in the last year of his contract, just because a club know that they risk losing him for nothing the next summer, it doesn't seem to have affected the kinds of valuations that that clubs are placing on these players. Is that era of cheaper purchases when the player is in his final year, is it all over now?
I think it was over decades ago. It just depended on how we valued money. We've been having record signings since the ages, since Maradona made his move, since Gianluigi Buffon made the move to Juventus. Was a record signing for goalkeepers before Kepa broke it. Was it in 2017 or in 2018? We had the record signing for Figo. In fact, it was going from a rival club to a rival club. Still, it was a record signing. Look at Fabregas moving to Arsenal from Barcelona. Look at Neymar breaking the bank. Look at Mbappe. A lot of players have been breaking the record. It just depended on how much was the valuation of money at the time. So as long as the valuation of money keeps increasing, inflation will continue to affect market value. So that's why you see the likes of Eden Hazard, for example. Even if he was a record signing, a midfielder or a winger shouldn't have gone for 100 million at the time. But he went for 100 million at the time because as of 2018-2019 specifically, money had skyrocketed. We knew how the forex was working. We knew exchange rate 2019 is different from when it was probably in 2013 when it came to Chelsea. So inflation definitely affects market value. And as long as that continues to rise, it will definitely affect the ball. That's why we're having Moises Caicedo going for over 103 million. Liverpool submitted 110. He still had your debt to reject. I mean, how much do you want? So,
I mean,
that's what we are seeing now.
But now, are we not entering the realms of just good garden variety greed driving the kinds of valuation that clubs are placing on these players? It's not within the realms of what is reasonable. It's not within the realms of what is generally accepted by the market as the current valuation of these players. Yet clubs continue to go about their business, raising the prices to whatever degree they want to. Sometimes to price the player out of a move because they genuinely just want to keep the player, but sometimes they do it just to see if a club is willing to pay that much money for the player. Is it greed that is at the heart of these valuations? Are we calling the likes of Brighton greedy now?
How can Brighton be greedy when they are the ones actually giving out the best of their players? I mean, come on. They have to make money. They would definitely.
But hold on.
The thing is, they would.
If it was you, and you wanted to buy the player, how much do you think would be reasonable for a player of his quality, based on what you understand about the market? How much would you go for? Because in my opinion, this is a player that shouldn't be worth more than 70 million pounds, maybe 80, if we're saying that the club really just wants what they want. But 100 million pounds now, valuation now, the fact that Liverpool have made a bid of 110, his valuation is 110, whether we like it or not. Talk to me about how much you would be willing to pay for Moises Caicedo.
I mean, I'll be willing to pay any amount Brighton is calling. The fact is, these are the only ways these clubs will make their money. They wouldn't win the FA Cup of this world. They wouldn't win the EFL of this world or the Premier League. How would they get their money? West Ham that won the Europa League last season or the Europa Conference League last season was the first European Cup they would have in aeon of years. Where else would they have seen that money? I was watching an analysis on if Harry Kane should stay or at Spurs or leave and what financial impact it will have. And if you look at Tottenham Hotspur over the years, the positions they've finished since Pochettino was there, top four, top four, top four. Look at the amount they get from Premier League making that position. Now, probably 20 or 30 million every season. If they sell Harry Kane now for over 100 million, which is what Bayern Munich are submitting, they probably will gain more than they would if they left Kane there just only to qualify for the Champions League and get probably 25 or 30 million per season. It wouldn't favor them over the years because they have to keep Kane there for like 4 years. Meanwhile, that 4 years is what another club is requiring. Bayern are offering Kane 4-year contract with 400k per week salary. Now, the point I'm trying to make is Harry Kane for Tottenham Hotspur will be more of a liability than an asset if they understand the financial valuation. That is what it is right now. For Brighton and Hove Albion, the only way they are relevant is by selling good players. Look at Dortmund in the Bundesliga. Even on the last day, they still couldn't win the cup. But how else would they make money?
So in the future,
and they've sold Bellingham to the Magic for 100 million.
So in the future, you're saying that if Borussia Dortmund decides that Jude Bellingham, who is being pursued by a Real Madrid, a Man City, a Man United, a Liverpool, is being pursued by everyone. The player himself wants to go. He has made it clear on the record that he wants to go. He has informed the club that he wants to go. Effectively, what you're saying is that if Borussia Dortmund wants to place a £300 million valuation on him, so be it.
So the point is, they would also put a valuation that can be negotiable. Nobody, even Victor Osimhen that blew everybody's mind last season, nobody's rushing in for more than 110 or 100 million from Napoli. You still have to be reasonable in the market, regardless of how pricey or the quality of the product you are trying to put on the show glass, like they would say. So it's not about the clubs placing any amount. It's about the player status, the contract status, and the club's stance coming to the fore. Where does Brighton feature in the grand scheme of things? How else do they get allowance? And how many players do they even let off season in, season out? Last upper season, if I will put it that way, they lost Cucurella to Chelsea. They lost Fofana to Chelsea last season. Now, they've lost Enzo Fernandez. They're about to lose Moses Caicedo. Trossard went to Arsenal. They've lost their pricey players. And that is the only way they'll make money because they wouldn't necessarily win the league. Do you understand? So I feel like we shouldn't have too much on how much these clubs are demanding.
Okay, but hear me out. Hear me out. Even with the kinds of valuations that are currently being called upon, clubs are already making agreements to pay transfer fees in yearly installments. So when you hear that Rice has joined Arsenal for £105 million, it is not £105 million in lump sum. It is £105 million split probably over 2 summer windows or 3 or 4 because these clubs cannot afford to make these purchases. Meanwhile, they have other targets in the market. And if Arsenal are, let's say, paying £50 million up front right now for Declan Rice, and next summer they are going to pay another £50 million. Don't forget that they've also made moves to buy other players this window. They've paid over £60 million for Kai Havertz. They've bought Julian Timber from Ajax. They've spent significantly, and they would still like to buy 1 or 2 more players should the opportunity arise. If these deals are being split into 2-3 installments because they can't afford it, meanwhile, UEFA is going to register it as a single a single payment. It's going to, sure, amortized over the course of the player's 5-year maximum contract. But still, when the UEFA is counting how much money a club has spent in a certain window, it is going to consider that £105 million has been earmarked for Declan Rice, split over 5 windows, but ultimately all of that money is going to come due, is going to be registered as expenditure. So my point is, if clubs are already right now splitting their payments into 2, 3, 4 installments, what happens when the likes of Harry Kane, another Harry Kane in the future, is being labeled £150 million, and years later, another player of the same value, of the same quality, is being called for £200 million? What likelihood will clubs be able, especially clubs in Europe, because the Saudis don't seem to have the problem of being able to spend this money? How will European clubs compete when the likes of Real Sociedad, for example, they won't be able to buy marquee signings like Declan Rice. They won't be able to go into the market and buy Modric. They won't be able to buy Moises Caicedo. So all of the power is accruing to one league, the Premier League. And even the Premier League is going to be outpriced by clubs in the Saudi League. What does it say about the direction of the transfer market? Isn't it starting to seem like a house built with cards? And surely a house like that will fall eventually.
So, who is building the house? Is it the Premier League's fault that they have a high TV broadcasting right that drives the most conversation in the world, and so therefore translate to the amount of money they make, and so therefore translate to the kind of players they try to bring into the league? I feel like if other leagues want to come into the party, win the Champions League, look for a way to take the Premier League out of the picture. The fact is, there was a time, or there is still a time, when the Spanish teams were winning European League, and the big players were going there. For about 10 seasons, the La Liga enjoyed the Ballon d'Or with 2 players, only in the La Liga. How did they get there? Because they had the Real Madrid that won it 3 times on the bounce, that won it 5 times in 6 years. In La Liga, they had the Barcelona that was winning the La Liga season in, season out. Barcelona also won the Champions League between 2009, 2012, and the rest of it. They were still relevant. Atletico Madrid won the league twice in 10 years, right? So if you want to usurp the Premier League, win things on the continent, win the FIFA Club World Cup, and make money for your league. The whole reason why the League One is no longer in the top 5 and the Eredivisie has overtaken it is what we're talking about. Ajax and the rest of them, PSG, are achieving things in Europe that PSG are not achieving, that Monaco are not achieving, that Lille are not achieving. So it is about what the league, or what the clubs representing the league, win on the larger scale, rather than beefing a league that has a lot of competitive clubs.
Sell players to other English clubs, the price is even higher than perhaps if that player was coming from Spain, from Italy. It's like another 20% minimum higher than the price if that player was a marquee player coming from any other league outside of England. So it seems to me that the English clubs themselves, the ones that are doing the selling, are driving up the prices. And I suppose the real issue here is that once upon a time, Italy was the number 1 league. At the time, it was the Spanish league that was the number 1 league. But the amount of money currently being accrued in the English game, the possibility of that circle changing, the possibility of the position of the best league in Europe changing and shifting back to Italy or Spain, or even the unlikelihood of it going to Portugal or France, that isn't ever going to happen with these kinds of prices, don't you think?
It's going to happen. I mean, when was Victor Osimhen not a marquee signing for Napoli? Where was he coming from? Lille, and that's the League One. Where was he going to? The Italian Serie A, the Premier League was not in the conversation. When Neymar broke the record fee, where was it coming from? The La Liga, Barcelona. Where was it going to? The Ligue 1, PSG. Premier League was not in that conversation. When Mbappe moved from Monaco to PSG, Premier League was not in that conversation. In fact, Eden Hazard left the Premier League to go to the La Liga. Marquee signing, the La Liga attracted probably the best player in the Premier League at the time. He just won the Europa League, so it was hot cake. It was next to sliced bread. And he went to the La Liga. So we are making it look like it's only the English Premier League that attracts.
No, but
not really.
but for years. No,
Okay.
sorry, for years in the Spanish game, the only clubs that could afford 50, 60, 70 million pound purchases were Barcelona, were Real Madrid. Napoli paid about 70 million pounds for Osimhen, but that was their only major purchase in the last 5 or so years. So since then, they've been buying 10 million pound purchases, 20 million pound purchases, and no more. So my point is, these clubs are only able to maybe make a marquee signing once in maybe 2, 3, 5 seasons. Whereas the English game is having a West Ham pay 50 million pounds for Parketta, pay 30 million pounds for Ward Prowse.
Yeah, so I get your points right now. But the thing is, you just mentioned West Ham, who have lifted themselves up to the point of winning the Europa Conference League. Again, it's down to the quality in the. Again, when I sit down and I hear the argument about the most competitive league in the world, the most watched, and people start saying, no, it's the Premier League, no, it's the La Liga. I'm saying this argument wins itself when you see the details. Look at Luton City, that are currently in the English Premier League. See where they were coming from. Luton City is not the mate of a Granada in the La Liga. It's not the mate of all these things. But coming from fourth tier, fifth tier, they found themselves in the English Premier League. Look at Wrexham. Where is Wrexham in the grand scheme of things? But they are going to the fourth league, they are going to the third league. Give Wrexham some time, you would see Wrexham in the English Premier League. It's not by chance. They were not helped. It's not like the American league that it's by merit or it's by your club status. You work your way through, you gain promotion, and you come to the top tier. So
Yeah, but
English teams themselves are helping themselves.
But you realize,
their competition.
But you realize now that the Luton, the Nottingham Forest clubs, these two clubs, by being promoted into the Premier League, they are automatically now more valuable, have more financial power to go into the market than a Granada that has been in the league for multiple years. That the likes of Getafe, the likes of Valencia, that have been staples in the La Liga for more than 5 years. You realize that a Luton now can go into the market and buy more expensive players than those clubs. So my thing is, this money is accruing to a certain league, and at a certain point, that league will command absolutely every single purchase, because in the future, and in fact, I can say it's already happening. If a club like Atletico Madrid is going into the market, and Atletico Madrid famously paid a huge sum to bring João Felix, a deal that perhaps hasn't worked out to the best expectations that they hoped. But they did spend a lot of money, about 100 million euros, to bring such a player into the club. But in a few years, when a West Ham says they want to buy a João Felix and Atletico Madrid is their competition, the likelihood is that West Ham are going to get João Felix over Atletico Madrid.
Again, it doesn't happen only in the English Premier League. Okay, let's look at it in context. The Inter Miami that Messi went to now, are they the best team in the MLS? No. As a matter of fact, at the moment, they are the worst of the worst. They are the one carrying the league on their head. They are the number 25 of 25. But they were able to bring Messi in. How? 10 years ago, there was a David Beckham that went there. And he started building his reputation. He bought shares as a player, became part of the ownership, have a share. Look at MLS now, and look at Inter Miami now, bringing in a Messi, bringing in a Jordi Alba, bringing in a Busquets. You are talking about the English Premier League. Which league in world football at the moment is commanding the most transfer fees? The Saudi Pro League, far away in the Middle East. How did they get there? Sponsorship. We're making it look like it is the English Premier League are sitting back and sponsorships are looking for them. No, they are lobbying for these things.
All right,
So
we need to wrap up.
come into the party.
We need to wrap up. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But I do want to ask this question, a quick answer. Does UEFA need to step in to control and regulate the prices in the market?
Financial fair play rule is enough. What your club gets regulates what you spend. That's all. Any other thing will look like a rich one.
All right. Thank you so much, Gboyega, for joining me and all of Plus Sports on Plus TV Africa for the show. It's always a pleasure having you come in and discuss these stories.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a wonderful evening. And to everyone at home, at work, wherever you've had the opportunity to catch us, my name is Mikhail Tinubu, and I'm always eternally grateful for your support and your audience. Have a good evening, and remember, life is never boring with some sports.